Hi, welcome to Pursuit Podcast. I'm Zach.
And I'm David. And today we have a very special guest. She's worked her way through the educational industry and has risen up the ranks.
Embodying the modern day businesswoman, balancing the demands of the corporate world while nurturing a thriving family life. Her journey in the educational sector is nothing short of inspiring and impactful. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you Ibu Stephanie Riady.
Hi everyone, it's so good to join you here today. Thank you for inviting me today.
It's our honor actually. And would you like to introduce yourself? Maybe something we should know about you before we get started.
Yeah, of course. My name is Stephanie, and I am first and foremost a mom of 4 kids, and I'm also Zach's auntie. But I also work in the Pelita Harapan Group as the executive director of the whole educational enterprise.
Well, we can't help but notice that you went to STH LV during your high school days, and David and I also attend SPH LV, and we can't help but wonder, but how has at your education in SPH, how has that sort of influenced and guided your career?
Well, first of all, let me share that I'm actually an alumni of SPH LV because I attended from K2 to 12th grade, so 14 years in total. But I'm now also a parent at SPH LV, and I also am involved as an alumni, and I'm also there overseeing the SPH group of schools from a Pelita Harapan group perspective. So SPH LV is such a special place in my heart because it intersects in my life in so many different ways. And I'm so privileged to have grown up within the SPH school system because I think that it really grounded me with the right values to go forward in life. You know, I think in this world today, there are so many competing worldviews, so many competing perspectives that it's so easy for a young person to get lost. But I think SPH LV really grounded us in the truth of the Word of God. And I think that first and foremost really shaped who my identity is as a person, as a child of God. And that really shapes the way I see work and I see family life. So I'm very fortunate to have grown up in the SPH LV ecosystem.
Yeah. Okay, what was that transition like? Getting, like, first and foremost, like, going to SPH LV and now overseeing the YPPH, like, as a whole, from UPH, SLA, SL Maraya, like, what was that transition like from attending the school, and how has that, like, benefited your profession, like, till this day? Like, yeah.
Well, I think that, you know, having been involved directly as a student, having received the education myself, it really shaped the way that I see education because I understand what it feels like to be a student and what it feels like to be on the ground within the school ecosystem itself. So I think I'm able to understand it so much more from a student perspective, but also from a parent perspective, from an alumni perspective. So you kind of get that whole package to understand the different facets of the SPH school. But I think at the group level, you know, my hope is really that we can bring my experience in SPH to very different settings in Indonesia. So, you know, schools come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. You have the SPH school, which is an international school, but we have 57 other schools in different settings, right? So we want to serve different communities, different peoples, but still have that same DNA, you know, that same core of what we offer as a school. So the question is, how do you take something from an SPH LV, for example, and still do the same thing in the context of Papua, you know, in the context of SLH Moria, or in the context of Palembang, which is an Dian Harapan school. How do you take that same concept and you replicate it across different kinds of school without forcing it to look the same, you know, because education is never a cookie cutter approach. It's always community based. It's always very dependent on the teachers and also the aspirations of the families. But we still offer that same DNA of a Christian education, quality education with global international standards. So that's our aspiration, right? How to do that well. And I think having experienced the SPH education really gives me a good perspective of how I would like to bring that also to the other parts of our Pelita Harapan group ecosystem.
I think another aspect of why it's difficult to spread education in Indonesia is that it's the 4th largest educational country in the world with millions of students and millions of teachers as well. Additionally to that, it's the largest archipelago. So geographically speaking, there's a lot of differences, cultural differences. How do you think this affects the way you're able to spread education in the way that you want?
I also want to ask, you mentioned, in a sense, you were like insinuating like that you wanted to you wanted to create this core, right? These core values, and you wanted to preserve it. How do you consistently like keep these values across a nation that's so diverse, right? Being a predominantly Muslim population, what's it like to sort of, well, first, could you expand on what you mean by those like core values, right? I'm assuming holistic education, right? Christ-centered education, to be stewards of Christ, right? How do you preserve those values, and how do you distribute it evenly, and why in specific areas, right? Like I know that you have like established schools in Papua, like why specifically?
Thank you for the question. And I think first and foremost, expounding a little bit about our values, we are an education group that delivers Christ-centered education. And not only that, education for us is where we see that all truth is God's truth. So it's not only about reading the Bible, that's important as a foundation, but it's also realizing that, the same God created this whole universe, also created our world. And so the way we understand mathematics and science and, even languages is really all tied back to the way that God created the world and the way God intended the world to be. And so I think that the Christian values don't stop at biblical studies. They permeate all the way through all the subjects that we study. The saying by Arthur Holmes is all truth is God's truth, right? There's nothing in this world that we can discover or learn that's not somehow tied back to the Lord, because He is the creator of all things, creator and sustainer of all things. So I think from that perspective, we want to have a very holistic perspective of Christian education, where it's not compartmentalized into certain subjects, but it really is all-encompassing in the education that all the students receive through our education system. So our goal is to deliver Christ-centered education in different settings. And so I like your question of, given the diversity of Indonesia, how do you kind of bring that to the different settings? And let me share a little bit about some specific cases, right, to illustrate how really different and diverse our country is. So, when we talk about SPH LV, and you guys are students there, we talk about families that are so well-traveled. They've seen the world. Most of the children there have aspirations to go overseas, maybe to the United States or the United Kingdom or Australia and Singapore and China and all that. But, when we go to a place like Papua, the struggles are very different because, for example, in one of the schools that we entered, their linguistic system was so limited that they did not have a numerical words for numbers beyond the number 3. Right, so it's like 1, 2, 3, and many. For example, the children did not know when they were born, so we have to resort to other ways of learning how old they are, like counting the number of teeth, kind of measuring the length of their arms, how they're able to touch their ears and all that. So there are different ways to find out. But this really just illustrates like the stark contrast between, a context like Indonesia where the aspiration of parents are so different. They're much more well exposed. But in Papua also, where the students still need Christ, even though they're very isolated in a community of maybe 1,000 people, but we still want to bring that Christ-centered education into that community. And so for that reason, really the form of education looks very different. In LV, it can look in the form of having a lot of teachers from overseas. We also have a lot of link-ups with overseas institutions. There's a lot of different ways that students are exposed through the IB curriculum or the Cambridge curriculum for other SPH schools outside of LV. But for Papua, for example, the context is very different. So the education is all-encompassing in the sense that we teach them how to have basic hygiene, brushing their teeth, how to take care of their clothes, and also into providing nutritional benefits, right? So we developed tilapia ponds. We tried experimenting with a chicken farm where they ate egg for the first time. And I think these are ways to expose them to the nutritional needs that a child needs to grow holistically. So, the same Christ-centered education that looks very different in both settings, but a lot of cross-pollination as well, because we take a lot of the inspiration from the SPH curriculum, from the Cambridge and IB curriculum development, for example, back into Papua, so that children can also be learning the best materials that can be benchmarked to our other schools outside of Papua. So really, these are just some examples of how we try to contextualize the learning in different settings and really meet the needs of the communities that we serve.
Okay. leading into that, I'd actually like, I know you've sort of already delved into some of the challenges that you've experienced trying to establish a presence in Papua, right? But I was wondering if you could like expand on it a little more, given that Papua is such a isolated place, as you've mentioned, and I'm sure there's a lot of cultural barriers, religious barriers that you'd have to tackle first in order to convince them that you're trying to serve them through God's work. How did you do that, and what are some obstacles that you've encountered throughout your initiative in Papua?
Yeah. So I think we believe that education really fits into a holistic community impact model. And so rarely do we actually we've never come into a community just by ourselves. But there are also communities that have been nurtured and have had long-standing relationships with the church, and especially also missionaries that operate within that community. And so when we come in, we're simply supporting the ministry that's already taken place there. And we come in with a school, and in most settings, we also come in with a clinic, because health and education are very closely tied together. You can't learn well if you're not healthy, but if you don't learn, you can also it's difficult to preserve your health. In many senses. And so for that reason, we come in as an ecosystem, and we support one another within the context of ministry that we serve in.
I think that's very interesting. I think what I really got from that is that we really need to like adapt the way we spread education through the way the culture is different, the way the socioeconomic status is different. And I think I want to take a step back. You mentioned that to go into Papua, we need to have this holistic approach. I think that correlates to your position as YPPH director, executive director. Could you take us through your day-to-day? Like, how does it look like being an executive director of YPPH, one of the most influential educational foundations in Indonesia?
Yeah. So I think that, life is about balance as well, because God created us that way. We're not meant to be people who just work, or people who just exercise, or people who, just read books or study. But I think we're meant to exercise all of the aspects of our lives. And I think tying that back into SPH, that's why we really believe in holistic education, right? Because, have you ever met a person who is so smart, but so deficient from a social perspective, right? And that really nullifies, or that cancels a lot of the good things in their life, because they might be smart, but if they can't relate to other people, there's really no point of the impact that they can make in life is much less. And for that reason, I think when we talk about SPH, first, I think the development of a student comes in the form of academics, yes, of course, but it also comes in the side of emotions, right? And in the spiritual sense, and also in the physical sense as well. Because again, we want to develop people who are holistic, because leaders are holistic. And for that reason, I also have a lifestyle that where I try to be as holistic as possible. For example, I do have work hours that are also in sync with my children's needs, because I'm also a mother, and I think it's important for us to be present for children. Especially during their early and middle years. And so for that reason, I think I go to work. Sometimes I exercise in the morning, but I go to work at about 7 or 8 a.m. And I leave work at around 3 or 4 p.m. and I come back and spend time with the children, do the homework, chat with them, try to understand what's going on in their life, what's going on in their thoughts. And sometimes it's in those quiet moments that you learn a lot of things, right? It's not the moments where you fire a lot of questions at them, but the moments where they're able to share their stories and they're able to tell us more about their lives, and you get a glimpse into what's going on in their minds. So that's kind of where we're at. But I do place a lot of emphasis on exercise as well, and I'm sure both of you do as well. And so I'm really interested. I see some juices here. What is this? Carrot juice and beet juice and vegetable juice. And so I'm going to try some right now. But while I try some, do you want to share a little bit about what this is?
Yeah, so basically that's a brand that my friend and I, basically it's a startup. The juice is called Fibre, and it's basically a juice that we're not necessarily trying to sell a product. We're trying to sell a lifestyle. A healthy lifestyle, a holistic lifestyle, right? A lifestyle that we're trying to compete with brands that children or even people like tend to drink, brands that are artificial, added sugars. People who drink juices have the intention to drink juices because they're trying to be healthy. But in this case, we're not trying to sell a drink that's encouraging people to be healthy. While that is the case in some way, we want to create a juice that people can just drink, right? But at the same time, it's beneficial for them, right? It eliminates that. It eliminates like preservatives consumption, added sugar consumption. It's all organic, freshly cold pressed, and yeah.
Yeah, it's really delicious. You know, I have a sweet tooth, and so when I have a sweet tooth, I tend to grab anything that's in front of me, even if they're chocolate bars or marshmallows. So I think having something like this is really helpful because, it's important to surround ourselves with healthy snacks that we can eat at any time, and also children that are growing up. And so thank you for creating this product. And I look forward to sharing this more. And I think everyone listening should give it a try as well.
Thank you.
I think to add on to Zach, it's also more affordable than the other cold pressed juice options. And
that just enhances the aspect about it being accessible to people of to different demographics, right? To everyone who don't need to see living healthily, living well as expensive lifestyle. You can drink it at an affordable price point while bettering yourself, bettering your living, feeling more energized, feeling more
feeling
productive.
better about yourself.
Feeling better about yourself. You don't have to spend a lot of money to have that feeling.
That's wonderful. And I think just to circle back to that and share, in our organization, we do a lot to encourage our employees to be healthy. And to be healthy and holistic, right? So holistic comes in the form of a lot of support when it comes to education, obviously, because that's our core, but also giving people time to spend and attend their children's activities in schools. In fact, our organization is highly populated by females, and I think a lot of females that actually have that same struggle of having to balance children with work. So I get it, I'm one of them. But I also want the people in our organization to have the benefits that I do, to juggle work life and also family life and still make both of them work. And on top of that, we recently launched a step count challenge in our organization where everybody is in their departments and their teams, and we count the step counts, and we make it fun, but also encouraging people to walk more. And we've seen that have a huge impact in our organization. You see people walking around, and the challenge is over, but you'll still see at 5 o'clock in the afternoon people walking up and down the boulevard to encourage and have that healthy lifestyle. And so that's wonderful, and this is just a wonderful addition to that. So wonderful.
Thank you.
Truly, health is one of the most important building blocks to success,
Yes.
education-wise and career-wise.
Would you say that integrating that step counting program, did that enhance productivity in your
Absolutely, that's right. Because we want to make sure that, especially the lecturers and the teachers who we invest so much in, for further studies, and it takes about 10 to 15 years for a starting lecturer to become a professor or guru besar in Indonesia, right? So you really want them to also be healthy and have a productive academic lifespan, and so health is really important for us.
I hope you don't mind me asking, but you mentioned teachers, right? If I could ask, is there being an SPH student, I'm curious, what are the requirements or standards that make a teacher qualified to becoming a teacher in SPH? Because teachers are very important. I don't see teachers as merely teachers. I see them as mentors, people I should look up to, people I can learn from.
Yes.
Right? People that set an example and help better myself. And I was wondering if you could explain this from a Christian point of view, right? Because SPH is, I wouldn't say intensive, because there is a connotation that comes with that word, but is very stern about Christ-like education. And I was wondering if you could sort of inform us about maybe a criteria of what makes us SPH teacher and SPH teacher.
Yeah. Well, there's this saying that the teacher is the living curriculum, right? So a curriculum or textbooks, they're just things on paper. But it really is a teacher that makes it come to life. And so we place a lot of emphasis on having the right teachers at SPH. And we look for several qualities, but one of the non-negotiable qualities that we look for is alignment in terms of the Christian faith beliefs, right? And not only that they would state that they believe something, but really to show that in their lives, because like you said, it's all about mentorship. It's about being able to be good role models to students. And so we don't want people who are just tick the box in terms of being Christians, but really people who believe it in their hearts and live it out every day in their lives. And I hope that you've also seen some of that You've seen that every day and the teachers that you interact with at SPH. But of course, on top of that, it's also important to be a qualified teacher. Good intentions or good values are not enough, but they also need to be able to have mastery over their subject matters and also to be academically excellent. And that comes through various forms, but one of them is also in terms of work experience, right? So we want teachers that have also years of experience down their belt, teachers who have been mentored with other teachers well in terms of the curriculum. And so these are some of the things that we have to juggle when looking for the right teacher to join our community at SPH.
I think another thing that I wanted to address, Bu, is talk of holisticity, being holistic in everything that you do. I think a culture that we see, an academic culture that we see around the world, not just Indonesia, is that it's very test-driven. And everything that we study for is very test-based. In Indonesia alone, Indonesian curriculums base their success based on the UN, the Ujian Nasional. And a lot of students devote their lives to test-driven education. And we don't have to look too far about that. Even in SPH, we see that. My friends and I, we try so hard. We strive to secure a good test score. And a lot of the times, we value ourselves based on these exams and how we do on these exams. What do you think about this? I'm sure there's a Christian aspect in the sense that we shouldn't be basing our value on these test scores.
We shouldn't be. I'd like to add on to that, actually. Like, incorporating IB as a curriculum in SPH speaks volumes, because IB aims to foster this idea of holistic, balanced education by integrating programs like CAS, encouraging students to go out of their way to spend more time and socialize with other people and not focus on academics. What was the original thought process behind integrating the system? And could you just expand more about David's point about living in a society that's very test driven, where taking tests it's almost as if your scores shape your identity as a student and your academic competencies. Like, could you explain about that?
Well, first of all, let me share a little bit about what I think is the rationale for a test, right? So because in any setting, you need some external benchmarks. For example, when you're applying to university, they're going to want to have a sense, an objective sense that you are qualified as a candidate. And they do that by benchmarking you with the rest of the world, right? So that's why you get your IB credentials, because there are, probably millions of students around the world that take the IB curriculum. They take the IB exam, and they can compare ZAC to another ZAC in another country, for example. And so I think that testing actually has its role. For example, another example is we do standardized testing within our schools because we want to be able to compare a school in Papua and a school in Lampung, for example, to compare how they're doing and whether we're having the same level of rigor in school A and school B. So there is a role for testing, but I think when testing becomes a problem is when it is high stakes testing. So, you try to summarize an entire student in one test, for example. That's what we mean by high stakes testing. And that becomes a problem because you kind of lose the perspective or the nuances of the student beyond that one test only. It's a very, homogeneous way of looking at things. And so that's why I appreciate the IB curriculum as well. It's because, there's also other forms where a student can demonstrate their value or their academic rigor. And, certain schools can also help students to create a portfolio. So portfolios enable you to showcase your work. For example, when you talk about the arts, right? Applying to an art school, they always try to look at your portfolio instead of like the singular IB Arts grade, because the portfolio speaks more to who you are, and it has more dimensions. You can be a certain kind of artist, or you can show a certain kind of creativity that you can normally may not be able to show in a test score. And so that's why we like to balance testing with other forms of measures as well.
I think one of the reasons why tests matter so much to students is so that they can get into the universities of their dreams. And a lot of these universities are just top names: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Oxford, Cambridge, Princeton. Oh, sorry, I mentioned Imperial. And a lot of these students, they just want to achieve those top name universities. But Zach and I were talking off camera, and we were discussing the fact that I think there's a lot more to it. It's deeper than that, than just achieving these names. What do you think is the rationale between picking a college besides just the name and reputation?
Well, I think before we go into that, I'd like to say that, all these top universities, they get students that have like the top grades. all the time, right? So again, it goes back to also like differentiating yourself and being able to have like a portfolio that you can showcase. Because otherwise, everybody would look like they're getting like, 40s to 45s in their IB scores. They would get a high score in their SAT score. So there would be no differentiation between you and another student in the United States doing the same thing. But I think if you were able to be involved in some of these other things, right, after school activities or leadership opportunities, mission service learning, I think these are ways to showcase yourself in a different light, because otherwise everyone would look the same. But I think going to your next question about how to choose a university, I think it's important to think about what you're trying to achieve, right? Because a university is really an education that helps you to get to that end. And I firmly believe that there is value to Christian universities. I attended a Christian university myself, and I know many people who do as well. Oftentimes there's a stigma that Christian universities are maybe a little bit less than the Ivy Leagues, But I think, again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. But certainly, especially for young people that are still trying to find their core, their values, trying to shape their worldview, I really had a wonderful time in my years at Wheaton College, because I was really able to learn the Bible courses and really integrate those Bible courses into the rest of my studies. And so I triple majored in philosophy and education, and also in biblical theology. And I really felt like it really shaped who I am today, in terms of the way I think. And even the way that I learn and I view the world. And so I see a lot of value in Christian universities. But I know that there are also people that are considering non-Christian universities. And I think that it's important to, again, draw back to your ultimate goal, right? We want to be holistic Christian leaders in the future. And so if someone does choose to go to a secular university, and there are many secular universities that are so great in their studies, it's important to understand that any studies will come with a worldview. For example, during my time at Columbia, I'm just comparing my philosophy education at Wheaton and Columbia. At Wheaton, it was all tied back to the Christian perspective. We learned, philosophers from Socrates to all the way to the postmodern philosophers. But at Columbia, the first thing that they said in class was, there's no right and wrong in this class. You can say, whatever your opinion, and all the opinions are equally valid, for example. And I think that's true to some extent, because we do come with different perspectives, but at the same time, it's really scary to make a statement that there's actually no absolute truth that you can say to even any philosopher. And so for that reason, I think it's important to continue to ground yourself in the right values and in the right Christian values, because the Christian religion really believes in absolute truth, right? There's actually very little. There's no relativism in this in Christianity. You might have different perspective or different ways of verbalizing something, but there's certainly right and wrong, and there's degrees of truth within a statement. And so I think it's important to ground yourself also with the right church community and continue to grow from that Christian perspective. To be involved in a church that teaches very strong theology and can continue to shape your mind as you face an education that may have differing perspectives. So I'm going to toss it back to you. What are your thoughts? Like, do you have any thoughts on, what universities you're going to think about joining next year? Because you're going to have to start applying in the next 6 months, right?
Yeah. So I've definitely, it's a bit of a difficult decision, right? Because there's a stigma that this might be the most important decision in your life, right? Especially living in a Chinese Indonesian household. The universities you choose, parents make it seem like it's going to determine your career path, and I don't think that's the case. And I think you've clearly stated with clarity that Christian education is often overlooked and is clearly shaped your profession in ways that secular schools can't, right? Establishing that objective truth, right? And keeping your values grounded and solidifying these this foundational aspect that plays such an important factor in your profile, right? And clearly that's helped you out in your career. So to keep things simple, I haven't determined what university I want to go to, but I've definitely been considering Christian universities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not like it's a cookie cutter approach for everyone, right? I think there are a lot of considerations that come in. Certainly a lot of values that come with a Christian education, but for those that choose not to, and there may be very good reasons why you choose not to, like, you know, you wanted to get into this top engineering school and maybe Christian universities, the Christian university that you want to look into may not have those programs. I think that's fine, but it's important to still be very intentional in growing spiritually and grappling with that, your Christian worldview and the material that you learn, right? Because at the end of the day, like I said, all truth is God's truth, and there's no dualism in this world. You know, there's the scripture and there's the book of nature, that there's life, but at the end of the day, it's scripture that forms your perspective and should shape the way you see the world in engineering or any other profession that you go into. So I think it's important to balance that. But how about you, David?
I think for me, a bit more than the university I'm choosing is what I'm passionate about. Mm-hmm. And I think what's more important than achieving these top names is aligning what I believe in and what I love to do with the university of my choice that facilitates that passion and facilitates that belief. So I think that alongside the university that you choose, I think what's very important is who you mingle with when you're in university, or what you do in university. If you continue to serve God in all the ways that you do, or if you just let loose and forget all your beliefs. So I think it's very important that you stay strong with what you believe in, mm-hmm. and just continue living your life the way that you and God wants you to.
Yeah,
absolutely.
To add on to that, I'm a strong believer that the people you surround yourself with shape with who you are, mm-hmm. and that's one of the benefits that I see with being in a Christian university. Being placed in a community where people love God and are taking that step to show that love for God, mm-hmm. to show that dedication, that commitment, mm-hmm. to praising Him. They're willing to take that really important step of life in an institution that places so much emphasis on living a Christ-loving life. And I think that's one thing that Christians universities do that sets itself apart mm-hmm. from other people,
yes.
from other universities. And I think that's so beautiful in a way, in that it's more of the community that's beautiful. They're making this commitment to show their dedication to committing a life that's dedicated towards living a Christ-like
mm-hmm.
Christ-like life, going into professions to spread the gospel and the works that they do. Being able to set an example and have people wondering, oh, this guy is a great guy. What's his motivation behind that person? And mm-hmm. being able to sort of portray yourself as a Christ-driven person. Yeah, I think that's one thing that's special.
Absolutely,
yeah.
And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that God gives to us as the community, the Christian community that we have access to, right? Because, we're not meant to live this walk of life alone, but really God surrounds us with, men and women of faith that continue to strengthen us, right? And He also works through them in our lives as well. So I think I like what you said about surrounding yourself with the right people and having that right community.
Yeah.
I think we don't have to look too far to the States or anything. I think YPPH has its own university, its own Christian university, UPH. What is UPH doing that facilitates this Christian learning, this Christian-based learning?
Yes. So UPH is also a Christian university with the same values as the SPH schools. All the students that go through our program have to go through this 28 credits of the liberal arts, or now we call it the Center for Foundational Education. So it's kind of like the liberal arts in the U.S. And that includes a lot of theological courses as well, because again, understanding God is not just about, feeling like you know God, but you actually need to understand God as He reveals Himself in Scripture, and through the lens of theology, because theology is really, generations upon generations of people who have grappled with the same Scripture and have, distilled, core beliefs on the basis of Scripture itself. And so at UPH, we believe that it's important to give everyone that foundation. And the students that are not Christians still take philosophical classes. They're not necessarily scriptural classes, but they're meant to probe you also to think deeper in life, because we believe that at the end of the day, God's truth is the truth of life. And so, we hope that by thinking through some of these difficult questions, it would also lead them to be more thoughtful people in life. But I think from an impact perspective, right, we have 15 faculties in total at UPH. So 15, I suppose faculties would be like schools in the US under a university. And our goal is to really graduate people who are going to then make an impact in the world. And so when we talk about impact, for example, we have a nursing program whereby we educate about 800 nurses every year, and those nurses then get placed in various parts of Indonesia, including in Papua, and including overseas as well in the Netherlands and in the United States and in Hong Kong, for them to really transform lives through their nursing practice. And we do this through all the other professions as well, whether that be medicine or law or pharmacy, or teachers college, music, and then you can name it all. But our goal is really to create future men and women of faith who are able to make an impact in where God places them in the next chapter of their life. Do you know what you want to be, or what you want to apply for in college?
That decision has not been made yet. I'm still contemplating on what I want to do, but I have, in my years in high school, I have developed an interest in environmental sciences over time, and I'm not entirely sure if I want to pursue a career specifically in that sort of field of work, but it's definitely a consideration worth thinking about. We've talked about impact, right? How you want your students to find their place in the world and sort of, I don't know if you mean this, but reflect godly character and to leave a footprint, right? But I was wondering how you would define success, because success is a very broad term. It's very general. But from your position, how would you define success? And
Success for myself?
For a student, actually.
For a student, okay.
Or for a person graduating out of one of your institutions.
Okay, yeah. So we believe that every person is gifted with, talent. And that every person has a calling from God. And God has placed them in this world for a very meaningful purpose, right? Nobody is an accident. He created everyone. He knitted them in their mother's womb. He knows everything about a person. And so we really want to have this dignified view of every student as, very, as created in God's image and very special and having a purpose in life. And we want to help students discover that purpose. And to develop that meaning in their life, because meaning comes when you're able to uncover your talents and really, in a God-guided way, to use those talents to make a difference in this world. And so I think success looks very different for everyone. For some people, it might even be a mother, right? I think people sometimes look down on, it might not be necessarily work-related, because people sometimes look down about family life, but really being a mother is first of all, it's a very difficult job. And second of all, it's very dignified, and it's what God intended for, for all females that have children. But also, some people are meant to be devoted at home with their children. And so we believe that there's no profession that's lower than another. There's no calling that's lower than another. I think it was Martin Luther that once said, a milkmaid is equally dignified as a lawyer, as a pastor, as a theologian. And so we don't distinguish, one profession as being higher and lower than another. But really, everyone really has their place. And we want to help them do that to the best of their abilities and in the way that best reflects what God wants them to do. And so, continue discovering what you want to do. Yeah. I think, some people know from the get-go, like, I want to be a teacher, or I want to be a lawyer. But other people like myself, we kind of drifted our way through to discover different things. I started off as a journalist, and I loved it. I loved the impact. But I think God directed me also into education. And I think all those things come together. The skills that I learned in journalism really helps me to be a better leader today. And so I think success and the journey looks a bit different from everyone. But I think continue to pray and ask God for His guidance. And in the right time, I think He will reveal what He wants you to do in your life.
I think the YPPH Foundation has clearly facilitated this sort of success, finding your own passion, this God-driven passion. But what do you think? Do you think that Indonesian education in general is on the right track? And if not, Where does it lack, and how do we fix this?
Well, I think it's difficult to pinpoint one solution or one problem in the Indonesian system because, now having been involved as an advisor to the minister, it really is so complex and there's so many things that you have to juggle, right? I mean, someone might come in and be idealistic and say like, hey, we shouldn't do the two-track system of the YPPH or the science and the social sciences track. We should open it up to as many subjects as possible. But you also have to realize that a lot of schools, public schools are funded by the local governments, and there's a resource constraint to it, right? So it's not as simple as saying like, okay, the SPH model, that's the right model. Let's start offering the IB curriculum for everyone. Not only is the IB curriculum license costly, but also to open so many subjects, it does mean that you kind of slice up the classes into smaller classes, and that's not a privilege that many schools have. And so, oftentimes I'm very wary of criticizing the government just because I understand the complexities of what it means to run an Indonesian school system of 40 million students and, hundreds and thousands of teachers and schools, millions of teachers actually. We're more than, I think, 1.8 million teachers. And so it's complex, and I pray for them every day to have the, God guide them into the right model for schools in different settings. We also know that, the way that the education system in Indonesia works is very decentralized. And so the local governments really have a lot of agency. The curriculum is determined by the central government to a large extent, but the local governments have their say and their management styles within the schools itself. And so really there's not really one solution that can fix everything. But it seems like the direction that we're going is toward going back to that, the two-track system of the sciences and the social sciences. And so there are pros and cons to everything. And I hope for the best for the leaders there.
Yeah. We've recently discovered that you've mentioned that, we've recently discovered that the Riady Foundation actually invested 500 billion rupiah in STEM education, right? And you've mentioned that there's a clear gap in STEM education, particularly in regions that are underdeveloped.
Yes.
Why place so much emphasis in STEM in Indonesia, and what outcomes do you see in making this investment?
Yeah, so let me pull it back to like a nationwide perspective, right? So, nations like Indonesia, we want to become more prosperous. In order to be prosperous, we need to have people who are highly capable, right? And so there's actually a way to measure this. One way to measure it is called the Human Capital Index. So if you and I, for example, we have the potential to be at 100 unit points of output in our life, right? Singapore would be at 88. So someone growing up in Singapore would have an 88% output rate. Someone in Indonesia would have a 54% output rate. So that's to compare like the sophistication and the capability of someone from Singapore as opposed to Indonesia. And so you wonder, like, why is Singapore 88% and why are we 54%? And it boils down to a lot of things, right? From stunting, we have a 22% stunting rate in Indonesia. When you're stunted, that means you don't grow to your full physical potential. It means that you are more likely to be, intellectually impaired, right? So that makes an impact. Education makes an impact. So in Indonesia, almost everyone gets 12 years of education. But what about the adjusted years of education? We're actually at 7.4 years, right? Because the quality of education in Indonesia does not enable most children to flourish all the way to a 12-year education level. The third one would be like deaths, right? So if you have people dying, of course, they wouldn't be living to their full output because they'd die either at childbirth or in childhood or in young adulthood, for example. And so these are the things that we have to tackle in order to make our society more productive. We want to be a productive society. And so for that reason, one of the issues that we've really wanted to tackle is that, years of schooling. So again, like I said, we get 12 years of schooling, but the adjusted rate is 7.4 years. Why? Because STEM is an important component in enabling someone to be very productive in the future. And if we don't have the strong sciences and maths and literacy, these are things that impair us in the future. And so, if you look at our PISA test scores, for example, you'll see that our math scores have never been on par with the OECD countries, the developed countries. Our science scores have never been on par. And in fact, we kind of increased after 2005 But during COVID, we slid so badly that we're actually at or below 2005 levels. And so this is really concerning, right? Like, not only are we not catching up, we're actually growing, lagging behind. And so we think that STEM education is important. Again, we can't solve all the STEM education problems in Indonesia, but we think it's our role to support, because we also have dabbled into experimenting on what it means to have good STEM education across our school system. For example, in an SPH, it might look like the Applied Science Academy in which you're involved in. But in Papua, it looks different, right? A lot of the teachers are not necessarily trained to be scientists. You don't have that access to Dr. Eden Stephen and other lecturers from the Jakarta area. And so what you're left with is our primary education teachers, but they're still very good teachers. And so if you empower them, for example, you give them a science curriculum, you give them a science kit, and very clear directives on how to use those, those resources for the students, you can actually improve science outputs quite reasonably, on par with nation standards. And so these are some of the things that we aim to do to bring science education on par, because again, science, math, very critical to creating a productive workforce in the future. So that's a little bit about our exciting STEM.
We wanted to ask a bit more about your family, right? We can't ignore that you're the daughter with two very inspiring, two visionaries, Pak James and Ibu Eileen. And we wanted to know, what was it like being raised in that household? How did they inspire you? How did they mentor you? And how did they sort of set this path or helped you create that path towards your career? And could you expand on that?
So I think there are two things that I'm very grateful for. The first one are strong values and discipline. And the second one would be exposure. So I'll go through both. But, I was raised in a household not only with my parents, but with my two grandparents as well, who I look up to, Pa Mokhtar and Ibu May. And so, they've always had this very unique combination of strong Christian values, but also very strong Chinese values. And so some of the things that my grandma used to educate us with is, she would wake us up in the morning with a discipline to learn Maupi, Maupi, the Chinese calligraphy. So we'd wake up at 4:30 in the morning. We'd learn how to do Maupi. She would teach us also how to, live a disciplined life, how to wash our clothes, how to clean the house, how to scrub the trottoir outside the house. And so these are some of the values that, maybe we were complaining about growing up. But I really appreciate it now because it really teaches you hard work and grit and really, the value of making do in life, whether you're rich or you're poor. These are some of the basic life skills that you do. You never know where life will take you, but you need to have these basic values and grit in your life. And so I appreciate the combination of the Christian values and also the Chinese values in life. But I also appreciate the exposure because I think my family was always about exposing us to new things. For example, I remember my very first internship in 3rd grade was actually as a cashier in Time Zone. And so I was in charge of selling the coins. Back then, we didn't have those digital cards, and so we had those coins. And people would buy coins, and I'd count the tickets and give them the gifts and all that. And I think that exposure was was so great. And I also did a second internship 1 year later in the Aryaduta Hotel, cleaning rooms in the bakery and pastry sections, and also as a front office helper. I suppose I wasn't I wasn't meaningfully helping, but I was there helping along. And I think it really enabled me to understand, for example, the hospitality business, all the components that go into a hospitality business, and the exposure was very meaningful for me. And so these are some examples of what it was like growing up. And I hope that future SPH students get the same upbringing as well, from a grit perspective, right? I think, Zach, you mentioned about you being involved in the mission service learning. I know that some of my other nephew Ezra was also in Papua to serve there. I think these are some of the exposures that you need to learn because people live in different contexts, different circumstances, and being able to adapt yourself, adaptability, right, is one of the important traits that we need in the future. But also exposure. I shared a little bit about SPH, but I wanted to share exciting things that are going on. We're developing an equestrian center and also a performing arts center. And really why, right? Because people always ask, if you're not going to be an artist, why be involved in the arts? But actually, being involved in the arts really does enrich you in anything else that you're involved in the future, even if it's not in the arts. Because, there's a lot of transferable skills that you get by being in the sports team, by being in the arts, by being, involved in horse riding, for example, that are very transferable to future skills. And so I think it's important to be exposed to as many things as possible, whether it be in the real in the real world of work or life, as well as in school, in the different disciplines in school.
I think that's very interesting how experience builds grit as well as knowledge over time. But I really want to know, how did you get into horses? What sparked your interest?
Well, why specifically an equestrian center? It's a very niche.
Well, it is very niche.
Very unique.
Honestly, it's not for everyone, but I really enjoy it. And I feel like it's maybe a long lost desire that I had growing up. And so, growing up, there was, SPH was known for their equestrian program. And it's so interesting because after the program died in 1998, everyone who came still wanted to be involved in the equestrian program, but no one actually enrolled in the program. And so, it really was a trademark program of the school. And I was involved in it. My sister and my brother was also involved in it. And, I loved it a lot because it was not only the riding part, but it was the part of being with horses. They're such kind animals, and just hanging around horses in general. That's what I did in the afternoons. I just could go over and braid horses' hairs and brush them. It's like a little girl's dream. And so in 98, actually, we were very close to buying a horse. My father was like, okay, my sister is into horses. We want to buy a family horse. And then the crisis came. The dollar became 8 times the price of a dollar, from 2,000 to maybe like 16,000, I think, at the peak at that time, per US dollar. And so I'm sure the price of a horse multiplied 8-fold. And so that was the time when he was like, okay, the horse program died because the people working were expatriates, people involved in the equestrian center. They went back to Australia. The horse program died, and that was that. But I think there was always that desire in my heart of that program. And when we got together with the alumni, and a lot of alumni that were involved in that horse program that now have children and want the horse program to be back as part of the school, school programs, it kind of, the dots connected. The passion was there. Equestrian is a sport that's been growing over the past few years. Now there are about 200 imported horses coming into Indonesia every year as a testament to how many people actually are into the sport. And that number only continues to grow. More and more equestrian center. And so we think, maybe it's a good time to bring this back. It's niche, but it's also got a very loyal following. And so that community is really one that we aim to serve and really bring them to be involved in the SPH community, right?
Wait, you plan on opening this program to SPH students as well, not limited to
Yes, absolutely.
UPH?
So it's going to be a Pelita Harapan group signature program. And so our goal is really to have equestrian riders in all of our schools and to have them all come in the center and compete against one another in a very healthy competition way.
That's
so it's a little bit late for you, but
that's
maybe.
definitely fun.
Yes.
When you plan on opening this?
So our center should be done by end of December and operational by January.
I see.
Yes.
So we'll have time.
No, we won't.
Oh, we won't have time.
Well, you'll have half a year, so no problem, Zach. We can put you on a horse. You can ride my horse, no problem.
Yeah, Theo was telling me about how you spent 500 juta on a horse.
No. Well, horses are quite expensive, but our horses are investments, right? Because you need a good, trustworthy horse. Horses come in many temperaments, and this is the reason why we don't just pick random horses from Sumba, for example, right? Because we want horse riding to be safe, because it's actually the 3rd most dangerous sport in the world, after car racing and all that. So you really need a well-trained horse, a trustable horse. You don't want to put your child on a horse that's not well-trained. And so for that reason, we bring the highest quality horses in to our equestrian centers, and we train them with the best trainers for children to ride, because we want the safety to be number one.
Horse riding being a very niche and very unique sport that I don't think a lot of people do in Indonesia especially. Has there been anything that you've learned from horse riding that has been transferred to your life?
Yes, absolutely. Horse riding has a lot of life skills, but I think one of the things that I'd like to share is that, horses they have personalities with as many varieties as human beings, right? And so, when you hop on a horse and you treat them as an object, that's really not the optimal way to do it. the optimal way is to really learn and understand a horse, because at the end of the day, it's a partnership. I'm not into competitions, but if you are going to be into competitions, it's like 50% horse, 50% you, right? So if your horse doesn't trust you, if you don't know about the horse, if you don't know the quirks of a horse, because every horse is different. Some horse might be better with their right leg, some horses are better with their left legs, some horses get spooked easily, some horses are more temperamental. So every horse is different, and it's a partnership. And so, that's the same thing in life, right? When you work in a team in the future, like when I work with our team in the Pelita Harapan group, it's not just me employing someone and saying like, hey, you do this, and if you don't do this, I'm going to fire you. But actually, it's a teamwork, and the chemistry is so important, because it's not that the horse is good or not. It's whether you can draw the good qualities in a horse or not, right? And that's the same with people. It's not whether someone is good or not, but it's really about how you are able to create an environment that enables someone to thrive, and whether you're able to create a team environment that enables the team to work together. Because 1 + 1 + 1, the three of us, it doesn't make 3. It can actually equal to 10 if we have the right working chemistry. And so I guess that's one thing that I learned from horse riding that I think is very transferable. But I think that's something that you can also learn, like Zach, you love basketball, right? Basketball is the same thing. That teamwork and understanding your teammates is so important to creating the team chemistry. It's not just checking the boxes of having a point guard and a center and, and the other positions, but it's about how the coach is able to facilitate all the people to come together to make a great unified team. Yeah.
That's a good way to parallel the two.
So
yes.
Maybe more than skill, it's more about team chemistry.
It's
and how you interplay
the
with
bonds
each
you
other.
make.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. A bit of a fun question. If you could go back in time and do some things differently, whether it be your career or behavioral aspects or whatever, what's one thing that you would do?
That's a good question. Well, I would say that, first of all, I wake up every day in the morning and I thank God for the role that He's placed me in, because I love it, and I think that's not a privilege that a lot of people have. You wake up and, I just I can't wait to get back to work. On the weekends, I can't wait for Monday, because I think there's so many wonderful things that we have in store, new schools that we're opening, teacher pipeline that we're developing, students that we're impacting. So that excites me all the time. What could I have done differently growing up? I think that I did not take life seriously as I should have, right? I was actually I wasn't your ideal student. I was actually very lazy. For me, if you can get by with 6, why do 10 kind of thing? And so I don't think I explored life to the fullest potential. And you only go through life once. So I wish I involved myself in more things. I wish I took life more seriously. I took my studies more seriously. I think that I didn't give the sciences enough attention as I should. And part of me always thinks that maybe if I took my math and sciences more seriously, I could have also excelled more in the STEM subjects as I could have. And so these are some of the things that maybe I would have done differently in life. But there's no point looking backward, because I think, life is not binary in that way, right? Like you did something wrong and therefore you impaired your life going forward. But I think it's about the lessons that God teaches you along the way and what you make of it now. And so, again, I'm very grateful. I'm thankful. I have such a full life with 4 children, my parents that mentor me all the time, grandparents, and my niece and nephews, one niece and many nephews, like you and Max. I think you guys, add so much color to my life, and I'm very grateful for it every day.
We were wondering, is there a book or a quote that changed your life, made a really meaningful impact in your life?
Well, I think I'd say one quote that I like to share recently. I mean, it's a generic quote, so it's not like something from a book. But, people often hear the quote, you can't be a jack of all trades. But, the rest of the quote is often overlooked, right? They say, but being a jack of all trades is better than being a master of one, right? And so I think that goes back to our whole conversation about holistic education. Rather than focusing your life, because I know a lot of young people like you're like about university acceptance, I want to get into Harvard and the Stanfords and, Columbia. I mean, that's great. And I think if you get in, that's wonderful. You know, that's certainly an achievement on its own. But really, it's not about excelling in one thing, right? A master of one, about that getting into university or being that excellent engineer. But life is about holistic and being well-rounded. You need to develop your social skills. You need to develop your network. You need to develop your understanding of fields beyond what you're interested in. Even if you're not interested in the arts, you need to still expose yourself to the arts, to the music, and to have that open mind to be curious about everything, because that's, I think, what is more of a determinant of success than being such a great master at one thing. We know a lot of people, like I said, that are so great at that one thing, that one engineer that's like so smart, but is not able to relate to everyone else. And at the end of the day, it really works against that person. And so if I could close with one quote, that's what I would say, right? Continue exploring, continue opening up your minds to as many things as possible, while at the same time, of course, being grounded in the values that anchor you, will anchor you through life, which are the values that have been instilled through SPH, those Christian values that guard your heart, anchor your identity in Christ, and not in the things in life. Because life will take you many ways, many ups, many downs, probably more downs than ups in life for many people in this world. But how do you let that not affect your life, not affect your mood, not affect your self-identity, is if you know that Christ loves me, and at the core of it, I'm made and I'm special in the image of Christ. And the world could go upside down, but that's really what matters most at the end of the day. So, yes, that'd be
that's
it.
a message very well sent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You think?
I think it's
Okay. We really appreciate you coming here, and it's an honor for us and a privilege for us to interview and sort of tap into your life and the things you do for a living and what you hold and the things that you hold true to yourself and your identity in Christ. And we really appreciate the value, insight, and wisdom that you are giving to our audience. And we just wanted to say thank you. Before we close this podcast, do you have anything to say?
Well, I just want to say thank you as well for inviting me. It's a privilege. I don't want to embarrass you, Zach, but when I think of you, I think of a little boy. And so it's so wonderful to see you flourish into a young man. And also you, David, I think so wonderful to see you do this project together with Zach. And I wish both of you all the best, and keep on learning and keep on being rooted in the right values. And I will be praying for both of you as you discern where to go next in this journey of college and where God takes you in life.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you guys for tuning in and watching. We appreciate your attention. See you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.